This is the last mass production based race car to ever win Le Mans. But calling it based on a mass production car might be stretching that definition to the absolute limit. Even the name was different, because it was called the Porsche 935. The 9 story began in 1973 with the 911 Carrera RSR. The 911 was already competitive in sports car racing, but Porsche decided to up the ante a little bit by entering it in FIA Group 4. Now, in order to make a 911 capable of beating up the Maseratis, the De Tomasos, and the Ferraris, Porsche had to make a monster. Now, they developed the road car alongside the race car in order to maximize the homologation rulebook, which means the bodywork was resculpted out of fiberglass, featuring massive cooling ducts, intakes, and a ludicrous rear wing. Look at that thing. It doesn't even look like it belongs on the car, because it really doesn't. And all of that helped keep the 30-70 weight distribution of the old 911s in check. And then, just for good measure, they cut the weight down to less than 2,000 pounds, and even included components from their 917 Le Mans car that won Le Mans 2 years earlier. But the crown jewel was the engine. Per regulations for turbocharging, it had a 2.1 liter flat 6 engine with a triple K turbo on it, making 500 horsepower. Not only was this Porsche's first production-based race car with a turbocharger, this was the first race car with a turbocharger, period, at Le Mans. In its 1974 debut, it scored second overall, beating some of the prototypes. Only 4 were made of the RSR turbos, and they went up for auction a few years ago, but did not reach the $6 million reserve. But for Porsche anyway, back in the 1970s, they had a problem and it wasn't meeting a reserve. It was the new sports car regulations, which were rewritten into the silhouette rules in 1976. Manufacturers were free to add massive bodywork extensions, allowing for bigger tires, wider track width, and other aerodynamic aids. And that meant the now ancient RSR turbo needed updates. Luckily, Porsche had updated the 911 itself into the 930 turbo. So they built 930s for Group 4 and Group 5. As you can imagine, being Porsche and German, they called them the 934 for Group 4 and the 935 for Group 5. Yes, there was a 934-5 in 1977, but it only competed in the Trans Am Championship for a single year before being banned. Granted, it won the championship in that single year, but it only raced for 8 races in its entire life. So we're going to focus on the 935. The 934 had success in its own right, but we're going to focus on the bigger brother, the 935, starting with the 76, which was the first year in 1976. Again, the Germans so clever at naming things. And it was the first 935, which was a bit of a frantic design, to say the least. It debuted at Mugello, finishing first and second. Then, just when they had everything set up for 6 hours of Silverstone, the officials deemed that the hood of the race car, so basically the trunk, if we're looking at it from a side view, must be able to fit on the road car. Like, the parts must be interchangeable between the race car and the road car. And it didn't fit for the crazy over-the-top engine. So they had to replace the air-to-air intercooler with an air-to-water intercooler real frickin' quick. And at the small price of $830,000 in the 70s. But it worked. It started strong with a pole position, but unfortunately some mechanical woes meant the BMW team, led by the 3-liter CSL, won. And this led to an all-out war between BMW and Porsche, as both manufacturers began emphasizing turbocharged machinery. Ironically, both the BMW and Porsche turbocharged vehicles hit problems at the 1,000 kilometers of Nürburgring, which meant they naturally aspirated BMW CSL1 again. But this was all just warm-up for the big one. The showstopper, Le Mans. You see, Porsche's mechanical failures at the Nürburgring helped prepare them and helped them fix all of their problems for Le Mans. And combine that with a new slant-nose bodywork to reduce drag down the Mulsanne straight, allowed Porsche to finish first and fourth overall, with the 936 winning outright in the prototype class, and the 935 claiming its class win that same race. And the best BMW can muster was 10th, the filthy cowards. At the end of the 1976 season, the 750 horsepower 3.5-liter CSLs were a worthy opponent to the 935. However, as shown at Le Mans, the 935 was more reliable, which meant that Porsche claimed its first sports car championship title. So in 1977, Porsche did absolutely nothing to the design, pretty much, called it the 935-77, and focused solely on Le Mans. Which is ironic because when they decided to focus only on Le Mans and not the title, they won the title, but not Le Mans. Weird. Reliability was a big issue at Le Mans, and it didn't have much success. Really the biggest thing about the whole 77 model year for the 935 was that German tuner Kremer began selling privateer versions of the 935 that he bought from Porsche, and they actually began to outperform the Porsche team, which really ticked off Porsche. And the fact that the privateers were beating them in their own game meant that they designed the fastest Group 5 car ever to put them in their place. It was called the 935-78. It had 2 turbos, 3.2 liters, 4 valves per cylinder, water-cooled cylinder heads. The entire floor pan was removed to lower the ride height by 4 inches. Jesus. How do you lower a race car's ride height by 4 inches? Look at that thing. That's the 77. That's already very low. How do you lower that by nearly 4 inches? I don't know. The Germans are magic. But that was just the start of it. They went as far as moving the driver's seat to the right-hand drive configuration to improve handling on a clockwise Le Mans track. They put the gearbox upside down to reduce drive shaft angle, and then there was the bodywork. The slant nose was kept because it helped cut through the air, but then they elongated the entire body, streamlining it, making it nice and slippery, and they even put flanges on the doors to improve airflow just a little bit more. Its long tail and white paint earned it the nickname Moby Dick, and while it was named after a whale, it certainly didn't go like one. It weighed just 2,100 pounds, and with the turbos kicked up to 11, it could make 850 horsepower in 1978 with a flat 6, measuring 3.2 liters. That's ridiculous. And even more ridiculous is it got its first shakedown at the 6 Hours of Silverstone, where its qualifying pole position was just 4 seconds slower than the pole position earned by McLaren F1 driver James Hunt in his Formula 1 car. This sports car was only 4 seconds slower than a Formula 1 car around the same Silverstone track. And at Le Mans, it achieved something ridiculous. Moby Dick recorded one of the fastest ever trap speeds for a lower GT class in history. A top speed of 228 miles an hour, which was faster than Porsche's own 936 prototype. This thing could out-drag a prototype. Unfortunately, Moby Dick had engine problems and could only muster in the top 5. Luckily for Porsche, 2 of the older 935-77s managed to win their class, both IMSA GT and Group 5 classes at Le Mans, saving the brand from a bit of a humiliation. After a redemption arc at Le Mans in '78, Porsche began work on 1982 rule changes and retired the factory 935s. But that wasn't the end of the story, no. Because now we have to focus on Kremer that I mentioned earlier. They had been building the privateer Porsches for a while, but found some good business with the 935. First with the K1 model in 1976, and the K2 in '77, and finally the K3 in '79. I guess they took a gap year. Now, the crazy thing about Kremer is that in order to wear the cars in and test their equipment and machinery, they drove the actual Le Mans cars from their factory in Germany to Le Mans on the public roads. Why can't American laws be more like European laws in that regard? That looks amazing. Now, this also had an unexpected benefit in that in order to drive it on the road, they had to install windshield wipers on their cars, and for some reason, a lot of Le Mans cars didn't have windshield wipers. This actually had an unexpected benefit because in 1979, the rain came. Torrentially. And while the prototypes and the other IMSA cars couldn't see very well, the 935s with their windshield wipers could see, which meant they could carry more speed, be brave around corners, and since they're based on road cars, they're better acclimated to the weather. Which means, despite the odds, and despite being in a lower GT class compared to the prototypes, the 935 won the 1979 24 Hours of Le Mans outright. Not only did it win, it scored first, second, third, and fourth. It was only the second lower class car in Le Mans history to win outright. And another production car of any sort, in any class, wouldn't win again until 1995. And it also has quite possibly the strangest driver lineup in history. The second place 935 was driven by, among other people, the Academy Award winner Paul Newman. Yeah. Meanwhile, the actual winner of the race was driven by a Kremer driver, Klaus Ludwig, and 2 Whittington brothers from Texas. Now, the Whittington brothers honestly deserve a whole thing on their own. Their story is something straight out of Scorsese, because they paid for their drive with drug money. Drug money. And in fact, they bought 3 more 935s from Kremer for their IMSA team, cash. They paid for 1 car, plus 2 more, in cash. They carried, apparently, in today's money, about $1.7 million worth of cash to Le Mans that year. And they had some fun with the 935s. They did everything from bribing officials in order to get a faster fuel flow rate during pit stops, or fitting their 935 with nitrous at the 24 Hours of Daytona in qualifying, which, when they activated the NOS on the straightaways, made 1,000+ horsepower before crossing the line and exploding the engine. At which point they would just swap out the $40,000 engine like it was a K20 and slap it back in there. That was the peak for the 935. Their outright win at Le Mans was a shock, and it was the high watermark, if you will. After that, success started to dwindle. In 1982, all of the groups 1 through 6 were ended in favor of Group A, Group B, and Group C. Granted, it was still mildly competitive in IMSA GTP, with an overall victory in the 1984 12 Hours of Sebring, once again against fully fledged prototypes. But its ground effect took shape in 1984 in these Group C prototypes, the phasing out had well and truly begun. And by 1985, it was once and for all retired from IMSA racing and motorsports as a whole. But you know what? It remains as one of the greatest racing cars in history. Out of the 370 races it entered around the globe, it won over 150 of them. It scored Porsche 3 straight FIA Sports Car Championships. In endurance racing, it won the Nürburgring 1,000 kilometers 3 times, with 6 outright wins at Sebring and Daytona each. And then to top it all off, the shock win at Le Mans, which is still one of the most surprising results in the history of the race. And the Moby Dick engine was used as the basis for the engines found in the Porsche 936-81, the 956, and the 962, which went on to win Le Mans that year for every single year from 1981 to 1987. And in 2019, Porsche paid tribute to the 935 with the new 935, which was built off of the ultimate Porsche 911, the GT2 RS. Granted, they never took it racing, but it has the modern interpretation of that crazy long-tail design. The 935 is, quite simply put it, one of my favorite endurance racers of all time. It won't have the same legacy as the GT40 in terms of, I guess, historical significance to the country it represents. But in terms of achievements, and punching well above its weight class, there are very few Le Mans cars, if race cars in general, that will ever be able to top what this 911 on steroids was capable of doing.